On our 2-year anniversary, my wife and I were out having fun with our other friends, laughing and dancing the night away. As the sound of the music filled the room, I cuddled up to my wife, and we moved our bodies in time to the beat of the music. When we looked at each other, it was as if the world around us had stopped existing for just a second. My wife pushed me away playfully while chuckling at the intensity of the other person's attention. As I watched the dazzling laughter of my wife, a sight that never failed to touch my heart, I couldn't help but break out in a grin. I had a job as a program associate, which was a role that required me to stay active and kept me interested in the field of technology. I had a wonderful marriage to the woman who would become the love of my life. We met in this club and both continued coming to the same vibrant place, which had quickly become one of our favorite places to hang out with our close friends and have a good time. Years ago, the beginning of our love story took place in this very same bar, on a night when I was trying to mend a wounded heart. After a recent failure in a relationship, I had been drinking by myself and wallowing in my own misery. When I turned around, a mysterious woman was standing there. She skipped over the formalities of pleasantries and went straight to the business of challenging me to a questioning game. I snapped at her because it was so irritating to watch her treat me as an easy target while she was asking questions that made me feel uncomfortable because she was asking me about my orientation and other personal stuff. I stated angrily, "I'm not here for a quickie." A loud slap was delivered by her palm to my cheek in the blink of an eye. I was taken aback by the suddenness of the event, as well as the intensity of the moment. We engaged in a heated verbal battle that went on for hours, and neither of us was willing to back down from our positions. With each passing minute, the hostility transformed into curiosity, and before we realized it, we were laughing together, taking pleasure in the rush of witty banter and discovering common ground. That evening was the beginning of a special and intense relationship between my wife and me that has lasted to this day. Our fights turned into meaningful dialogues, and our love became even stronger, despite the playful roasting of one another. After what seemed like a blink of an eye, our relationship lasted for 2 years before we made the commitment to get married. Now, it had been 2 years since we had tied the knot, and I wrongly believed that the fire of our love was still burning brightly. As our group of close friends joined us for a night of dancing at our favorite club, I couldn't help but think about how far we had come as a group. My wife was my support system, my companion in mischief, and my closest confidants. She brought color, happiness, and even a little bit of disorder into my orderly existence. But it was all an illusion created by her. In the middle of the dance floor, I gave my wife another hug and drew her closer to me. This time, as we looked into each other's eyes, I felt an incredible rush of love and gratitude for the lady who had turned my life upside down with a single slap and a brave question. I was so naive. It seemed to me that our love story took an unusual turn, and the fact that we fell in love at first sight was the force that kept us together, which made our journey all the more interesting and significant. I assumed that as long as we had each other, the club where we had first met would forever remain our treasured sanctuary. Our love had blossomed amidst laughter, arguments, and the magic of the dance floor. However, I had no idea that this club was going to haunt me until the end of time, because it would be the place where I found out about my wife's infidelity. After 1 month had passed since that beautiful night at the club, during which my wife and I shared laughs and danced till the early hours of the morning on the anniversary of our wedding, the days that followed appeared to run together as the daily grind of existence took hold. Tonight, however, was not like other nights. Tonight, something was different. As I climbed into bed, I noticed that my wife was still dozing off, with her eyes looking as though they were heavy with exhaustion. The need to be engulfed in the comforting warmth of her company made it impossible for me to fight off the urge to draw her closer to me. My wife whispered something endearing as she curled up next to me with a happy expression on her face, and her eyes half closed. She said with a dreamy and sweet tone in her voice, "Why do you smell different today?" I laughed lightly and asked, "Why don't I always smell this good?" Her eyes widened for a split second, and then a hint of mischief flashed in them. My wife laughed as she lightly smacked me in the chest and then burst out laughing. "You wish," she teased as she ran away playfully, leaving me smiling as I fell back into bed, feeling a sense of bliss and contentment. Our lives had become a chaotic swirl of work and commitments, and as a result, we only had rare chances to spend time together. However, when we did have those short times together, it seemed as though our relationship hadn't changed in the slightest. I felt grateful for the sense of continuity and stability that our partnership continued to provide. As I got ready for the day, my wife was leaving for work, and I was trying to make the most of the few minutes that we had left together. But I had no idea that today would be different. When my wife came home unexpectedly, her demeanor was gloomy. She then proceeded to drop a bombshell while staring directly into my eyes, and her voice was shaking. She came clean with the acceptance. "I'm not happy anymore, and I want to get a divorce," which left me speechless and expecting a comeback line to come next. But there was no sign of laughter. I froze up while frantically looking for answers. "Why? What exactly took place?" I pleaded, the dread in my chest making my heart race. A conversation that had begun with love and laughter earlier in the day had now changed into one that was extremely difficult to listen to. My wife said that although she still loved me, the way she felt about me had changed to that of a profound friendship, rather than a romantic love. She had been struggling with this decision for some time, bearing the weight of uncertainty all by herself. I couldn't believe she said that, so I made an effort to see things from her point of view and offered to work on our relationship in order to reignite the passion we used to have for one another. But she was adamant in her decision, and one could feel the anguish in her heart. As the day went into the night, she comforted me by talking, crying, and closely holding me. The future that we had envisioned for ourselves together appeared to be unknown at this point, and the realization placed a heavy burden on both of our hearts. I was aware that despite the love that we still had for one another, there was no denying the fact that our emotions were shifting. I grudgingly recognized, with a heavy heart, that sometimes love takes on a different form. And despite the fact that this experience could be excruciating, it is necessary to appreciate and respect the feelings that shape our hearts. In the aftermath of the decision to file for divorce, I found myself seeking solace in the exact club where I and my wife had first started our romantic journey together. As the wounds left by our breakup were still fresh, I sought solace in the support of alcohol, in the vain hope that it would dull the aching in my chest. While I was sitting at the bar deep in thought, my eyes wandered over to my wife, who was dancing passionately with a man I had never seen before. I was shocked. I was overcome by a wave of conflicting feelings that left me feeling rigid and unable to believe what was happening. I was reluctant to endure the sight of my wife moving on so swiftly, so I turned away from her and looked aside. After a few minutes had passed, my wife became self-conscious after noticing that I had been staring at her and approached me. She admitted that she had met that man the previous day and that they had gotten along brilliantly from the beginning. I was saddened by the discovery, and I couldn't understand how she could go on with her life so quickly. Despite this, I wanted her to be happy more than anything else, even if that meant she was with someone else. I forced a grin and assured her that I was pleased for her, all the while attempting to conceal the agony that was eating away at my heart. After my wife had excused herself to go to the restroom, I made the decision that it was time for me to depart, despite the fact that I was experiencing a variety of feelings that I was unable to adequately describe. When I was standing at the counter to pay for my drinks, the man who was having an affair with my wife appeared beside me to place his own order. He had some light conversation with me in an effort to ease the tension, and he apologized for the situation. Both of us were in agreement that this was an extremely strange circumstance, given that the divorce papers had only been submitted a few days prior, and my wife or her girlfriend was already seeing another man. Then, though, the disclosure that my wife's affair partner had made hit me like a ton of bricks. He admitted that he had been dating my wife for the past 3 months, and that she was the one who initiated the relationship. My entire world appeared to come to a halt, and it felt as though time had stood still at that precise moment. When my wife came back into the room and tried to pull his partner away, he shrugged her off and proceeded to say something else before continuing. But I cut them off, wished them luck, and made the decision that it was time for me to leave the club. When I turned around, he asked for our number swaps, which caused my wife and I to look at him with a lot of questions. However, deep down, I wanted the same. Then he indicated that the divorce was not yet finalized. So in the event that I was unable to reach my wife at her phone number, I should have her boyfriend's contact information in the event of an emergency. The following morning, when I was at work, I got a call from my wife's boyfriend. He wanted to meet with me and talk about something. I was quite interested in hearing about my wife's antics. I told him that I was available for the meeting. As I and my wife's boyfriend sat down to have a conversation, we couldn't help but feel a mixture of uncertainty and fury at the realization that my wife had been lying to both of us. He had been my wife's boyfriend for a while. As the truth slowly unwove itself before us, we both came to the conclusion that we had been taken in by a lie. My wife had presented various scenarios to both of us, which led her boyfriend to believe that she and her husband were participating in open marriage, while she made me believe that we had mutually decided to separate owing to incompatible differences in our viewpoints. My wife had painted distinct portraits for each of us. The falsehoods were extremely hurtful, and as a result, both of us are beginning to wonder whether or not our relationship with her is genuine. Even when things were challenging, I had faith in the resilience of our love for one another and remained hopeful that we would be able to resolve our differences. Now, the very basis of that love has been disturbed, and it has been replaced by emotions of hatred and distrust. Even my wife's boyfriend was having trouble processing the information. He had shown that he valued my wife's apparent honesty regarding her marriage by being careful not to cross any boundaries that he had set. The revelation that she had lied about her relationship with me left him with the impression that he had been taken advantage of. As we talked, we realized that my wife's web of lies extended further. She had been secretly seeing him for 3 months, all the while maintaining a facade of separation and openness with me. The truth was far from what we had both believed. My anger was boiling because it was impossible for me to have imagined that my wife could be so crafty. And in that very moment, I made the decision that I would never leave my wife without first teaching her a lesson that she would remember for the rest of her life. I created a plan to get my retribution, and I told the man who was dating my wife that if he would assist me in carrying it out, he would not only gain the gratification of his dignity, but also the satisfaction of having restored my respect for him. Despite the fact that I did not like him and did not trust him, I decided to record all of our conversations throughout the meeting. I had no intention of being friends with him in the future, but I couldn't allow my wife to get away with disrespecting and playing with him in such a way, so I needed his backing at that moment. My wife's boyfriend escorted her to his house 4 days after that meeting, as per my orders, and I was there at his house waiting for them to come as I was in another room with a security guard from the company where she worked. She complained to me numerous times that she hated the security officer because he often stared at her, so I decided to exact my vengeance by using him in order to make her haunt more interesting for the rest of her life. Together with that security guy, I sprayed her with the cologne that her new lover wears so that she wouldn't notice that we were there. Her partner instructed her to turn out the lights after they had finished having their disgustingly revolting pleasure for a bit, which was the next step in the plan. When my wife was ready to crawl out of bed to turn out the lights, her boyfriend stopped her and leaped out of bed at the same instant. He turned off the lights and cracked the door of his room so that we could sneak inside. The purpose of her boyfriend expressing his desire was to get her to turn around so that we could trade places with her boyfriend as the guard. The fact that she had been holding out for this for such a long time prompted an immediate affirmative response from him. We were able to successfully make the transfer, and as a result, my wife was now attempting to please the same creepy security guy that she hated. When I was sure it started, I turned the lights on. My wife's eyes were initially closed, but when she opened them, she saw her boyfriend and me standing in front of her. At first, she was startled and bewildered, but when she turned around and saw that her guard was in this place, she screamed and went forward in order to detach herself from that guard. After that, she hid herself and began sobbing and yelling, demanding to know how we could treat her in such a manner. How could we have been so heartless? After I had finally had enough of her nonsense, I informed her that this would be her punishment for being allowed to play with us. She dressed herself and fled as I began exposing her falsehoods in front of her. As she rushed out of the premises, I also exited because now I felt it was pointless to stay there, and on the way home, I received a call from the hospital informing me that my wife had been involved in a terrible accident. After a difficult 2 months had passed since the explosive revelation of her fraud, in the midst of all of the emotional upheaval, fate proceeded to throw another curveball my way. My wife had been involved in an accident that caused her to fracture her right hand and spend a week in the hospital as a result of the injury. Despite the fact that the hurt and resentment were still present, I couldn't help but feel a twinge of empathy for my ex-wife. During the proceedings of our divorce, my wife requested absurd concessions from me, one of which was the deletion of a photo that showed her having fun with a security guard. I did it in the end in the hope that it would prevent any future conflict. One day, as she was gradually recovering, she shocked me by pleading with me to begin again, indicating that she was willing to forgive me for the things that I had done. Confused, I couldn't help but wonder why it had taken her such a long time to advise that we get a divorce, if she had been feeling bad and had tried to distance herself from me. She said that shame and my attempts to rebuild our relationship were the driving forces behind her decision to cut ties with me. Realizing that our marriage had been constructed on a frail foundation of half-truths, the admission only left me feeling even more conflicted and heartbroken, and it made me realize that our marriage had been based on a lie. After that day, however, none of her phone calls were ever returned, in spite of her pleading. I had the overwhelming desire to fortify my defenses against the emotional upheaval that she brought into my life. In the middle of the challenges that both I and my wife's ex-boyfriend were facing, we discovered comfort in the experiences that we had in common. When we got together one time, we drank away our sorrows and made a pact to stay away from the chaos that she had introduced into our lives. Even though we worked together for a while to exact our vengeance, the animosity that existed between us continued to fester. It was too painful for me to look at his face, since it was a continual reminder of the dashed hopes and dreams that I had once had with my unfaithful wife. As the hours evolved into days, I concentrated on getting better and starting again with my life. I surrounded myself with supportive and sympathetic friends who were there for me when I needed them. Even though the wounds of the past took a long time to heal, I never gave up faith that time would eventually bring resolution to the situation and the fortitude to move on.